Welcome. Scott here. Here is a quick boss guide for the upcoming LUFENIA Plus event, Illusory Lighthouse Mission Dungeon event. The featured units are Vayne and Gabrant from Final Fantasy XII, Yuri from Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, and lastly, Cait Sith from Final Fantasy VII. This event also marks the debut of Cait Sith's LD. Be prepared for some ghost-busting action as we will be fighting a White Priest, which have 15 million HP. It can summon 2 familiars with 1.8 million HP each. The turn requirement is 95. The HP requirements is 18,000. Before I continue further, here is a small disclaimer clause for the video. The guide is written based on the time that the event was released for the Japanese version. Please do note that it is possible that the boss fight mechanics might differ when the actual event is released in global. Firstly, let's go through the LUFENIA Plus orb conditions. The LUFENIA Plus orb conditions for the fight requires you to inflict poison or sap debuff or break the target to uptick the orb. The orb will be activated at the start of the fight with the counter of 12, it will disable once the boss HP drops to 79%. Afterwards, it will reappear at the 59% HP threshold with the counter of 12. To maintain the orb, you need to inflict breaks on them. Doing so will uptick the orb by 1. If the boss takes brave damage from sap or poison debuff, it will uptick the orb by 8. As the boss gains absurd defense boost auras up to 300%, lower their defense is crucial. Cait is featured here since he will enable 100% critical rate for the party and also enabling the party the ability to constantly break the boss. Examples with units with rebreaks mechanics that could be useful for the event: Vayne, Cloud of Darkness, and Gabrant. Examples of units that offers poison or sap debuff: Gabrant, Ferris, Sarah, Yuffie, Beatrix, Shantato, Sephiroth, or Kumari. You can use them in the party or have used them as call ability. Do note that Cloud of Darkness have a poison aura as well. If you don't want to bring a debuffing unit for the fight, you can equip a RF Ferris or then Cred Sphere on a unit with E-Sphere slot to handle the orb. Lastly and most importantly, please do remember the boss needs to take a turn for the debuff to take effect. Now let's proceed with some party setup recommendations. Recommended calls abilities. To ensure that you are able to constantly break them, it is important to inflict defense down debuffs. Example of calls abilities that inflict defense down calls are Ferris, Jack, Titus. As the boss has a huge amount of HP damage up debuff calls like Kareza May, Gabrant, Ignis are useful. Although a bit trickier to use, aura type HP damage up calls like Queen and Kumari are also viable. Next, I will be covering units that will be useful to handle the fight mechanics. Firstly, you will probably need some form of damage mitigation for the first phase of the fight. My recommendations include Zack, Beatrix, Core, Gabrant, and Hope. Secondly, turn manipulation is important since there are important thresholds you need and you won't want to push the boss too far back with delays. Example of such units are Sid Reigns, Aphma, Ignis, Onion Knight, and Ashe. Thirdly, and perhaps the most important role that you need is a turn disabler. Agrias, Cloud, Shantato, Edward, and Camlanot are some examples. Some of the units have pretty dated kits, so you might need to carry them with other units if you intend to use them in the party. One good example is Camlanot. Ashe also has guaranteed paralysis on her EX. If you are feeling lucky and loves to gamble, you can try to use Waka, Mog, or Purim. Lastly, like other LUFENIA Plus events, having a designated support for the auras are important. Examples include Purim, Setzer, Bartz, Yuna, Iroha, and Cait. Units that are highlighted with green borders have sap or poison utility, so they can help you on the orb as well. Do you notice that Agrias has a yellow border? She is the MVP for the fight and more than 50% of the JP runs feature her. Don't worry too much if you don't have her, I am sure that there will be content creators going to do runs that not featuring her. Before I going with the details of the boss mechanics, here is a diagram illustrating an overview of the fight. The fight technically can be divided into two phases. Phase 1 is the phase where the main boss will hide itself with two familiars summoned. The main boss has 100% evasion rate, so you can't damage it until both familiars are dead. While hidden in the background, the boss can do HP attacks, buff and heals the party. It is your interest to kill off the familiars as soon as possible. As it is in 100% dodge mode, please do note that your attacks or debuffs will miss. Calls have 100% hit rate though, so use them if you need to refresh your debuffs. After you have killed both familiars, the main boss will active Pure Malice with a massive Brave gain. In phase 2, it will be exposed for you to damage it. You need to avoid giving it a turn to act, otherwise it will re-enter into perfect dodge mode and summon the familiars, thus bringing you back to phase 1 again. To avoid this from happening, you need to inflict with a turn disable ability like paralysis or confusion. The boss also has the ability to instantly warp their turns when you approach certain HP thresholds. So it is more important to keep their turn disabled once they are in this mode. Pacing your attacks through the thresholds is a very important aspect for this fight. Lastly, please be reminded, you will also need to the boss to take a turn for the poison or sap debuff to take effect to uptick the orb. Now let's proceed with the boss mechanics proper. Like the previous LUFENIA Plus fights, the boss will gain big stats boosts, Brave damage, and Brave gain reduction auras when you deplete their HP to a certain threshold. The threshold's trigger for this fight is at the start of the fight, 79% HP threshold and 59% HP thresholds. At the start of the fight, it will boost its defense by 200%. At 79% HP threshold, it will further boost the defense to 300%. The maximum Brave damage reduction auras is 90%. The maximum Brave gain reduction auras are 70%. To handle these auras, having a good support is important. Inflict Brave damage up calls like Jack and Sephiroth will help a lot for the fight. As mentioned earlier, defense down calls like Ferris, Titus, and Gabrinth are important, so you can be constantly breaking the boss. Units that offer Brave Cap or Rainbow Brave damage like Setzer and Core are useful as well. Kate's LD gimmick will allows you to do damage with its 100% critical rate boost along with max Brave refund on critical hits. It is indeed a very nice utility to get. The refund will be more powerful depending on the number of the buffs present on your party. If you have resources to pull for his kit, I will highly recommend you to pull for him. He will benefits a lot of the upcoming units as well. Now I will be covering the phases in depth. For phase 1, I have listed down some general pointers for you to take note for the fight. Don't waste your abilities targeting the main boss. You will need to kill off the familiars, which has 1.8 million HP each first before you can start to damage the boss. During the HP phase from 100% to 79%, the orb will be active, so you need to finish off the familiars and giving the main boss a turn to act within 12 orb turns. If you really need to inflict a debuff on the boss, use a call ability. If you have then Cred or Ferris Sphere, the poison aura will take care of the orb itself. I won't cover in depth on the boss moveset since you probably won't see them once you get out of this phase. Watch out for the familiar Dread Plus attack. It can inflict a framed grudge debuff which has HP and Brave poison. If you have Yuffie, you can have her throw the debuffs back on the main boss. The White Priest has a wide arsenal buffing moves and it could do AoE healing on the familiars. When it is target all at your party, watch out for an incoming group Darka which will hurt your party if you aren't careful. Damage mitigation will help to minimize the damage from those attacks. Most of the recent support will have HP regen, so you probably heal up with that over time through the course of the fight. Your main objective is to finish up the familiars as soon as possible to proceed with the next phase. For phase 2. This is a punching bag phase where you need to give boss turns by denying it a turn to act with paralysis of confusion. Slap in all your HP damage up calls and focus on hitting the boss as hard as possible, and you will be threading the HP thresholds while going through the LUFENIA auras. Unless your party have an absurd amount of offensive power, you won't be able to finish nuking the boss in a one go. You need to give the boss a turn to maintain the orb for the debuff to take effect. If orb counter is low, make sure orb has least 2 when you give the boss a turn for brave damage from the poison or sap debuff to uptick the orb. Make sure that the paralysis and confusion debuff is active when you approaching the 79%, 59%, and 39% HP thresholds where the boss will warp their turns instantly. We have come to the final part of my boss mechanics overview briefing. The boss has an instant warp mechanic trigger at the following HP thresholds: 79%, 59%, and 39%. Upon triggering it, you will see the following prompt message: White Priest's turn rate became instantaneous. Please take an important note of the points that I have shown on the slide. Do take note that if you activate the thresholds while in summon or burst phase, the warp mechanic will activate right after your next active turn. Always attempt to make sure that the boss is constantly in disabled turn status, paralysis or confusion state, otherwise you need to go through the phase 1 hell again. Rayma summon is a good option for the summon option for the fight. Now for a last summary on the overview. Although the turn count may seem generous, the fight can actually be a hard one as it requires some careful playing and pacing of your turns and damage. Here is my 2 main points on the fight. In phase 1, kill off the familiars ASAP. Don't bother waste skills on the main boss. In phase 2, play in a way that the boss is under the constant state of paralysis or confusion. When you need to give the boss a turn to uptick the orb, make you can reapply the turn disable debuff back again on the following turn. Pacing is very important factor which will determine you are able to complete the fight unscathed or face those familiars again. I have come to the end of my overview. Good luck for the event. Bye.